I'm Madeline McCurry-Schmidt, and my job at ASAS is to write press releases, blog posts, update social media, and I'm also the person that reporters can contact if they want to get in touch with a scientist or get a scientific paper. And an interesting part of my job is that I get to see communications from a lot of different sides. I have to communicate with reporters, I have to communicate with scientists, and directly with the public. So I'm going to share a few tips I've learned that might help you share your research with a wider audience. So I thought the presentation title was interesting. They gave me this title, and I thought it was interesting that they included the word sell. We don't usually think about selling science. You guys go out and you collect data, you publish your results somewhere, and maybe you present them at a conference. You know, the science maybe speaks for itself. You know, the results are out there, people can find them. But the problem is that the non-scientific public isn't going to pick up a scientific journal. They're not going to try to decode the jargon, and they shouldn't have to. That's your expertise. So you need to think about someone who's sort of in marketing. You need to think about how to sell that science to people who don't want or don't know how to pick up those papers. So consumers have some questions, and like a good marketer, you need to answer these questions for your audience. They need to know if products are safe. They need to know if your research will affect them in some way. So that means you need to reach out to media outlets. So selling your science is really about helping the public understand why your research is important. So when I talk about the public, I'm not talking about producers, even though you should reach out to them. And I'm not talking about ag media. Ag media is magazines like National Hog Farmer or Feedstuffs, and of course those are great. I mean, I love to have our work in those. But when you're trying to reach a wider audience, you need to think more about the popular press. And we've seen that this non-ag, non-science public can make a big difference in animal agriculture. I mean, think about pink slime last year. It was the non-ag public that made that happen. And the public also votes on animal agriculture issues. So we've seen a number of ballot initiatives on food labeling and animal housing. And just last month, I think Connecticut passed a GMO labeling bill. So the public really does affect your profession. And if you don't supply the information, where are they going to get it? Well, we know where. We know there's groups out there that rely more on a passionate appeal than the scientific facts. We also know that fewer and fewer people are involved in agriculture, which means we really need to step up outreach. And if you're a researcher, an outreach plan can also strengthen your grant proposals. More and more funding agencies are asking for scientists to include a plan for sharing their research with the public. So when considering proposals right now, the NSF has a section in their broader impacts review criterion asking, will results be disseminated broadly to enhance scientific and technical understanding? Now, in the past, a lot of scientists have fulfilled this sort of requirement by making classroom materials, but as you see in the quote here, they're looking for some new innovative, creative ways for scientists to reach out. And contacting the popular press and serving as a resource can be one of those ways. So I want to start with a case study. This is an example of how the scientific facts turned out in two very different news articles on the same topic. So this is the abstract title. The top thing here is an abstract presented last March at the ASAS-ADSA Midwest meeting. And the researchers had discovered that cattle are more likely to stand on hot days when their body temperature reaches 102 degrees. And the researchers thought the cattle might do this to increase their surface area and disperse more heat into the air. So I thought it was an interesting study, and I liked how it combined animal behavior and animal health, and sort of clues for how producers might be able to spot heat stress in their animals. So I took notes during the presentation, and I spoke to the author and the presenter afterwards to make sure I had the science right. And here you see the article I posted on our site, Taking Stock, summing up the research. I also sent it out to several media contacts, and on a site that is very popular with science journalists. So one thing I do when I send out a press release is I include my email address and my phone number at the bottom, and sometimes people actually contact me. So a couple of days, or the day after I published my press release, a reporter from the New York Times contacted me. He was interested in getting a hold of the authors. He was interested in getting the abstract and maybe additional scientists who might be able to speak on the subject. And I was pretty happy with the article that came out just a couple of days later in the New York Times. The headline described the results without being sensational, so detecting heat stress in cows. That was a very accurate and not sensational headline. And the reporter really summed up the importance of the research. He wrote, "The cows were more likely to stand for long periods when their body temperature rose above 102 degrees Fahrenheit, probably because standing exposed more of their surface area to air, allowing body heat to disperse." So right on, I like that. The article also included info on how producers could help cattle stay cool on hot days. But there was also misreporting. This article showed up in the Daily Mail around the same time. It was also based on my press release. Unfortunately, the writer had never contacted me or any of the authors. And as you can see, the writer took sort of an interesting angle. He wrote in the introduction that, quote, "The old wives' tale, that cows lie down when it is about to rain, may be not so far-fetched after all. For researchers have discovered that cows stand up for longer periods when it is hot, proving there is a definite link between their behavior and the weather. They also suggest that cows lie down when it is colder, which is often what happens to the weather just before it rains." So my press release said nothing about rain. The study said nothing about rain. The reporter was trying to make the article playful, maybe. The old wives' tale angle might appeal to his audience, but it really twisted the conclusion of this study. And this might seem like a silly example. If the article did get some good coverage, why should I worry about this one weird example? Well, a weird, uninformed article like this really can change public perception of your research. If you read the comments section for that Daily Mail article, you'll see comments like, "How can we spend so much money on dumb studies that tell us what we already know?" One commenter wrote, "How many overpaid scientists came up with what people in the countryside have known forever?" So because of the writer's angle, this weird old wives' tale thing, people seem to think that the scientists were actually testing an old wives' tale instead of trying to solve a problem in the industry. So how come the same abstract and the same press release got covered so differently? Well, the first writer for the New York Times article was able to get in contact with scientists. He was able to get quotes from the scientists and ask follow-up questions. And I think this really helped him understand the science and its importance for the industry. And because the authors responded very quickly to that reporter, he was able to use their quotes in the story. So a lot of reporters are required to talk to sources, as they should, to make sure their stories are accurate. And it also really helps to use quotes to sort of jazz up an article. And sometimes, if you're the Daily Mail reporter and you don't have any quotes to use, you can try to jazz up an article by adding a sort of playful angle, like the old wives' tale thing. And obviously that didn't work. Also, when the New York Times reporter contacted me, I put him in touch with the study authors, but I also forwarded some other popular press articles about heat stress and some scientific resources about heat stress and cattle behavior, because I really wanted him to understand why this was important for the industry. Following up with those sort of resources is also something you can do if you're talking with the media. It's also something you can do if you're talking with a curious friend or a relative. But the Daily Mail reporter didn't ask for any abstracts or papers or resources. They didn't contact the authors or me for follow-up information. And did that work out? No, it did not. So as you can see, it really helps when reporters can talk to scientists to make sure they've got their facts straight. So have any of you ever seen a scientific fact or agriculture fact misreported in the media? Can you raise your hand? In the yellow shirt, give me an example. And what should the media know about that?
They need to know what happens to the chicken door, from the time of the chicken farm, who it actually is related to the feed farm, that kind of information.
And if they were smart enough to contact you, you could tell them exactly that. Somebody else, an example. Let's see, any misconceptions about dairy products? Nutrition? I think pink slime was a good example last year. A lot of scientists did provide resources, but I didn't see the media going out of their way to use those resources. So it's really, that was a good lesson for me, especially as a science communicator, about how much we need to sort of get ahead of those issues. I saw your hand up. So you sort of said that like a scientist, significant differences. And a reporter would want to know, what are those differences, and how do they affect my health? How might they affect the price of milk at a grocery store? You have to really think past the data and and anticipate some of their questions. So bad reporting happens sometimes. There are bad reporters, there's also good reporters, just like there are bad scientists and good scientists. And the main reason science gets misreported is a lot more innocent than people trying to misrepresent agriculture. A lot of reporters don't come from an ag background or a scientific background. I'm not from an ag background or a scientific background. And in my first week on this job, I put a picture of a dairy cow where I should have put a picture of a beef cow. And I got a lot of emails about it. I wasn't trying to misrepresent science, I just didn't know. So as animal scientists, you really need to share your expertise. So, like I said, talking about science to reporters can really help the media out. So I want to share a few tips for how to first just connect with the media. So if you work in academia, it's great to connect with your university or institution's press office or media office, communications office, whatever they call it. There are probably people on campus who have the job of sharing your research. And they're going to just explain your research in the most positive light possible. So next time you publish a paper or you set up an interesting program, you can get in contact with that office and they will be really happy to hear from you. It can also really pay off to connect with student journalists. A lot of universities have a regular student paper, and while this isn't the New York Times, it'll give you more attention on campus. And the nice thing about student papers is they often have a very active online presence. So if people are searching for certain terms online, they're more likely to run into your article and get the information directly from you. Also, a lot of universities and institutions have a place on their website called an experts list. This isn't really for the general public, but it's something that reporters look for when they're trying to find people to quote and using stories. And your communications office probably takes care of this. This is a screenshot of the experts list on the UC Davis site. You can see that reporters can search for hot topics like animal welfare, genetic engineering, organic farming issues. And if you want to be on a list like this, which I recommend, you can just contact your communications office. So be a resource. Return calls and emails as soon as possible. Reporters are on a deadline, so if you don't respond, they're often going to look for another expert, and who knows what group they're going to be from. And, but don't rush into it. If you get a call from a reporter, you're welcome just to tell them you're going to call them in 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. Then do some Googling. Make sure you're comfortable with that publication, you're comfortable with that reporter, and then call them back. Also, if you're not an expert on whatever topic they called you about, or you're really are too busy to talk, it's good to recommend other sources. Don't leave them hanging. Like I said, there are groups out there that are happy to supply some information about agriculture, and by following up like this, you can make sure a scientist with the facts gets in touch with them. Also, please pause and explain statistics. I really, really appreciate when scientists do this. One of the most common things you see misreported in science articles are probabilities. Probability you're going to get a certain disease or get hit by a car or something. And often that's because reporters don't understand how to read those statistics. Also, you can offer to fact check an article. A lot of media outlets, for ethical reasons, do not allow sources to read a full article before it goes to print. But you can always offer. There's differences in the rules. If you're concerned about how you're going to be quoted in the article, you can always ask to have your quotes read back to you. A lot of media outlets will do this. And if you think you're being misquoted, you should let the reporter know. And if you're still worried about it, you can always contact the higher-ups at the magazine or the newspaper. Just like you've got higher-ups in your lab, they have people who can tell them to make changes to the article. So there's some pretty basic things you're going to want to share with a reporter if you're talking about them. Obviously, the results of the study. You're going to want to share why it's important to the industry. But I think it's nice to add a little personality. Show that you're excited about this research. This is also good for PR reasons. People have the misconception of, faceless factory farms, or pigs are on conveyor belts or something. And if you share why are you excited about this topic, if you share any unexpected challenges with the study, that adds a little personality to the study. It adds some anecdotes that the reporters can use. And it shows that real people are passionate about this work. So some pitfalls. Don't ignore bloggers. New media here to stay. It's very popular. And a lot of journalists who've been laid off from their jobs because of budget cuts in newspapers recently are moving to online publications like blogs. So it's still a great way to get your research out there. And if there's one thing you learned from the talk today, I hope it's that you shouldn't just refer the reporter to scientific literature. Occasionally, when I ask for some details about a study, someone will just forward me their scientific manuscript. And luckily, I know how to read a manuscript, but most reporters will not. They're not from scientific backgrounds. And if they did understand the study, they wouldn't be calling you, right? So it's helpful if you can actually talk to them and decode some of the jargon for them. Also, publications or newspapers aren't going to subscribe to every scientific journal ever, so it might also be hard for them to access the paper. Of course, after you talk to them and clarify some of the terms, it's really helpful if you can forward a paper. I also want to talk to you a little more about technical language. Like I said, it's hard to decode the jargon in a paper, but when you're giving an interview, you also want to make sure you avoid very technical terms. And I know when you see a term every day, it's hard to know, who knows that term. So you can slow down, ask the reporter if they're familiar with that topic, and then define the term. And the reporter will really appreciate this. I've included a quote from a very, very accomplished science reporter named Ed Yong. He says, if something is riddled with jargon, I can paraphrase it, but I can't really quote it. And that's because his audience won't know the term either. So if he quotes you talking about beta agonists, that quote is sort of a throwaway quote. He can't use it because you haven't explained the term. And he says that's riskier for you because I might inadvertently misinterpret something you say. So graduate student pitfall. This doesn't happen that often, but it happens occasionally. You don't want to step on anyone's toes or say anything you shouldn't say in an interview. But telling a reporter that you have to check with your advisor, how quickly do advisors respond to your requests every day? Maybe you have to wait overnight, you have to wait a little while. A reporter's on deadline, and if they have to wait for you to check with someone, they're going to move on to their next source, who, like I said, might not be a qualified animal scientist. So what you should do is early on in your project, talk to your lab mates, talk to your advisor or your co-authors, and talk about how you're going to respond to media requests. Is it okay if you respond? Does one of them want to be the go-to person so that instead of having to check with them, you can just be like, talk to this person when you hear from a reporter. Get that clarified early on. So this is a chart made by that science journalist Ed Yong. Just a reminder that just as you may have had a bad experience with a reporter or seen some science misquoted, reporters occasionally have bad experience with scientists. Maybe they just get their paper forwarded to them and it's stuff they can't understand or use in their article. Maybe someone blows them off for an interview. So just remember that one reporter doesn't represent all of them. It's really worth it to keep up with responding to the media and don't give up. So that's how to respond to the traditional media. But can I see a show of hands? Who read a newspaper today? Who watched a TV news broadcast? Who listened to a radio news report? Who went on the internet? Who went on Facebook? Is anyone on Facebook right now? Yeah, I tend to check online for my news. And I often get news from Facebook. Someone shares a link to an article, and that's how I find out about something. As you can see, more and more people are getting their news that way, especially in this younger demographic. And as we think about influencing consumers and future voters, putting your stuff online to appeal to this younger demographic is really going to make a difference. So I want to share a success story. This is a meat scientist named Janelle Yancey. She's at the University of Arkansas. She's very involved in social media. She also has a blog, and she organizes these Moms on the Farm tours. And this is her blog. It's called Mom at the Meat Counter. And in her own words, she has a mommy blog. So a mommy blog is, if you read a lot of blogs, it's a very specific genre of blog. People usually write in first person. They share anecdotes about their kids and tips for other moms. It's a way for moms to connect. My own aunt has a mommy blog about raising kids with ADHD. What's interesting about Yancey is she uses her mommy blog, which is appealing to this very specific audience, to share facts about meat science. So when her kid asks a question about meat, or she sees a news article about meat, and maybe she has some concerns, she can answer them here. So a lot of moms who maybe are buying groceries or hearing news reports about pink slime can contact this person who they really have gotten to know through her style on the mommy blog and get the facts. This is a picture of her family in Hawaii. This is pulled off her blog. Her family in Hawaii, and then below is a picture of some Hawaii-raised beef. And so she talks about this family vacation, but she also talks about, you know, the meat products she saw there and maybe how they're raised, a little bit of the science behind it. And I think that's great. And you can use the same strategies in your blog or outreach materials. You can write in first person sometimes. Don't feel like you have to stick with a formal Journal of Animal Science style. And say a reporter asks for a photo to go with an article. You don't have to send your little university mugshot. Take a picture of yourself out with the animals. Like I said earlier, it shows that real people are passionate about this work, and you're able to also connect with readers a little better that way. Like I said, instead of being like the Department of Animal Science or a faceless animal corporation, here's one person like Yancey that they can really connect with. So in conclusion, be a resource. If you follow up with reporters, if you connect them with sources, if you send them additional resources, you'll be that animal scientist on speed dial for them. And that'll really help when there is an issue like pink slime, where they know an animal scientist, a really helpful animal scientist they can contact. Also, whether you're talking to the media or directly with the public, try to make the science personal. Write in first person, share anecdotes, and show that animal scientists are everyday people who care about their work. So, any questions?